Hey, it's Thomas here. Welcome to another edition of BRS TV Reacts, the awesome show where I get to check out all of the tanks you, the reefing community, have going on at home. It's a ton of fun. I absolutely love it. I'm going to give you my thoughts, feedback, praise, maybe some constructive criticism or advice if you need it. And we're just going to have a good time because, you know, historically, you guys have sent in some pretty awesome tanks. So, shall we? Today is going to be a YouTube edition, meaning these are submissions that you've uploaded to YouTube with the hashtag BRStv Reacts. And that's how we find them. So if you want yours seen, you can go ahead and do that too. Should we get started? We should get started. Let's get started. First up, we've got Doug Conde. Let's see what Doug's got going on in his tank. Oh, sweet. Sweet, sweet, sweet. First things first, this video goes on for a bit. It's a couple minutes long, but I just want to address a couple things that I'm seeing right now because I like it. Number one, don't often get to see bicolor angel or half black angels in reef tanks. Don't see a lot of that, so that's super cool. Another thing, that wrasse is gorgeous. But the thing that caught my eye first, and if you guys don't know this about me yet, I'm going to tell you right now, I love tridacnid clams. There's a gorgeous Durasa and what may or may not be a squamosa or maxima. If I'm being perfectly honest, I don't get to see the videos in the highest clarity ever. We're fixing that. But I am obsessed with clams and I absolutely love them. And they look really great on this reef, which also looks super established, SPS dominant. I'm already just enjoying it. Very, very nice. Getting in a little closer on these corals. Everything's looking really good. Wrasses are looking sweet. Is that a sea bay anemone? I don't know what kind of anemone that is. I can't really tell. Another beautiful angel in there. Look at that. SPS are looking great. Nice cactus coral there too. Lots of mature colonies. Like, I absolutely love seeing these larger mature colonies, things that have been grown out for a while. So one thing I really love and appreciate about seeing more mature corals, especially when it comes to SPS, you can't really appreciate where, a particular species of Acropora or Montipora or whatever, what it's going to look like and what its true growth form is until it starts to get some size. For the first little while, a lot of acros look very similar. It's just going to be like a single branch or a couple of branches growing out. It has to reach a certain point before it starts behaving the way that coral naturally would, with some exceptions like F-flow tends to grow how F-flow grows no matter how big that chunk is. As soon as it starts growing out, you start getting that form out of it. But there's a lot of different acros out there that you can't tell are actually a tabletop or branching table or kind of cup-shaped acropora as it grows, where it's going to create this. Like millipore is a pretty good example. When a millipore grows out, it's like a single base comes up and tables out to the sides with all of the points facing up. You don't really get to see that. Even Red Planet does something similar. You don't really get to see that until they start gaining some size. So being able to see these SPS start to show their true growth forms and display that kind of pattern that they naturally have as they get larger is just so satisfying. The lighting's nice. Got a hybrid T5 with LEDs. Looks like a pair of Radion XR15s maybe. Not gonna lie, this is the exact kind of setup I would probably use for a tank. Tons of coraline growth everywhere. Sand's looking really nice. Blown out of the way in some parts, but when you have this many sticks and you're trying to keep the flow high, that's par for the course. Got some Ecotech pumps in there. Wow! I think that's an orange Setosa back there that you got down at the bottom. On the back of the rockwork, branching out, looking really nice. It's either that or a digitata, but either way, that is a beautiful specimen. That does look like Setosa to me. That is an absolutely beautiful growth form of that coral. Oh, getting down to some of the under cabinet stuff. Really nice and tidy. Glad to see you got battery backup on there. Redundancy is super important, especially when you've clearly got a lot of time and effort and even money like into this tank. You are into this tank. So backing it up with battery backup or, even if you have your own generator that you can throw on if you lose power and stuff, super worthwhile investment. I'm all about redundancy. I would hate under any circumstance to lose my tank. So especially like this thing is just looking so beautiful and mature. Like this, oh, I'm stoked. This is basically where I want to be in about a year, year and a half, maybe 2 years tops. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get there, but yeah, really, really nice. Tons of coraline everywhere too. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. You got a really nice tank. I don't really have any, critical feedback for you or advice. You obviously know what you're doing. You got a lot of beautiful coral growth going on. Tank's looking mature, some really nice fish. Got clams in there too. This is like a win for me. Really, really digging it, really digging it. That tank's only gonna get better and better. Next up, let's take a look at Leigh Weldon. Very cool. Okay, that's a really nice tank too. And I'll say very well scaped. Looks like possibly a Red Sea reefer nano or the Red Sea E-series nano, which gives you a slightly taller, it's almost like a column, but not really. Either way, well scaped to make good use of that height. It looks really nice. Corals are looking excellent. Great mix of LPS and softies. Got a digi in there too, I think. Got to get a little bit of SPS in there, right? So it's a really cool mixed tank. Corals are looking really, really nice. Lots of fluorescence. Things are looking super clean. Like the pumps have a little bit of algae, so does the outlet. So it might be time to, get those parts in a little citric acid bath, clean them up a bit, just so that they're running smooth for as long as absolutely possible. Keeping them clean is definitely going to help with that. But I mean, your substrate's clean. The back of the tank looks super clean. The sides of the glass are clean. And it's nice and bright. That's the other thing. I mention this every now and again, but coral fluorescence is amazing. And I absolutely love, seeing that tank, especially in the evening hours and stuff where you have the blues turned up and things are just glowing like mad. But overall, just when it comes to viewing a tank that has fish and a bunch of coral and stuff, having a slightly whiter, brighter tank is definitely my jam, and I really dig it. It looks really nice. These corals have so much color. Considering that the whites are turned up this high, I can only imagine what this tank looks like when you've got your blues turned all the way up and the whites turned down. Very minimal buildup on the substrate. I can see a little bit of algae, just a little bit, but I mean, that's probably just a matter of doing a little bit of siphoning on your next water change. Get the siphon going, clean that pump up a bit. Yeah, you got a little bit of algae buildup here and there, I can see. So my advice to you on that front is just check where your nutrients are floating around. There's a lot of nutrients that can affect algae growth. The two we most often look at as reef keepers is going to be your nitrate levels and your phosphate levels. So the easiest ones typically for us to track. You might just have slightly higher nitrate and phosphate. That's not a massive deal. There's a number of ways to kind of combat this. Obviously, cleanup crew's a really good one. Utilitarian fish and inverts. Obviously, sticking a tang in this tank is probably not going to be the easiest thing to do. Not many tangs are going to be suitable for a tank this size for very long, but is an option if you know somebody in advance who's going to be able to, take it off your hands as it grows. Otherwise, my favorite algae-eating snail to use in any system is a trochus snail. Reason being, they flip themselves over pretty easily. They are quite capable of reproducing on their own in your tank, and they just do a really good job for a snail, better than most that I've had in my tank in the past. So they've always been my favorite. You can always give that a shot. Beyond that, just keep up with your maintenance. That's it. If you keep up your water changes, maintenance, regulating everything, you usually beat it back. A really good option if you want to try to if let's say you're already maintaining your tank, you've got your scheduled water changes, your maintenance, everything's going well, it just seems to have taken a foothold and doesn't want to go away. If, snails alone is not really helping, or if you want to try something different, Vibrant can work extremely well on situations like this where you just have a little bit of green algae and stuff growing. I mean, if you check out the BRStv Investigates we did on Vibrant, I've brought Vibrant up in the past on BRStv Reacts. If you want to check out Vibrant, it is something that is very, very easy to implement. You just add it to what you're already doing with your tank, and over a period of realistically, typically 6 to 9 weeks, you're gonna see a pretty large reduction in specific types of algae in your tank. Bubble algae basically won't exist anymore. Chrysophytes, green hair algae, stuff like that disappear. The tougher ones like ulva and bryopsis and turf algae, you'll want to keep going a little bit longer and eventually up the dosage a little bit as you go. Slow and steady at the beginning, it's definitely going to win the race. I don't see any like particularly stubborn algae in your tank. I think it would do a pretty good job of just taking over and eating up all that algae and out-competing it. So give it a shot if you want to try to beat that back with as little effort as possible. And again, trochus snails are my favorite. Man, you did a really good job, especially like I said, with the scape on this tank, you did a really good job of utilizing the space that you're given with this tank. It is fairly tall compared to its width and depth, but that's, you know, pretty standard when you're dealing with small all-in-one nano reef tanks with that kind of cube-esque footprint. Just because of the nature of having that filtration in the back takes that cube footprint and squishes it front to back a little bit. So your actual working display area is a little bit thinner, but your rock work coming up in the center of the tank like that left you tons of room for coral. You know, it's going to be easy for you to like scrape the glass in and around the rock work and stuff. Maybe not behind it. I can't tell how close it actually comes to the back panel. So you may need to grab a power head every once in a while and spray it directly behind the rockwork, try to kick out any debris that might be trapped back there. But beyond that, like, it is just a really smart way to kind of utilize that space. You have a beautiful orchid dottyback. I'm a huge fan of dottybacks, by the way. They're one of my favorite nano reef fish. I've basically kept mostly nano reef tanks over the years, somewhere in the range of 20 to, I don't usually go over 50 gallons. I have had very big tanks in the past, like a 250 and stuff. But as you can see, I prefer like a 36 by 20 kind of footprint. They're one of my favorite fish. They have so much personality. They are so interested in everything that's happening in the tank. They can be a touch aggressive, so they're usually one of the last fish I put in, just so that, put it this way, they almost always hold their own, even if they're getting in a, you know, scrap with a 6-line, which can also be a notoriously you know, aggressive fish for its size. They're little bruisers, but they're always just one of my top probably 5 favorite fish for nano tanks. Lots of fun. Orchids are one of my favorite because their purple is so saturated and so mind-bogglingly deep. That violet color is just so nice. So yeah, I loved seeing it poke out there for a second. That was great. It was a nice surprise. Oh, you got a 6-line in there too. Look at that. They're getting along and everything. I'm guessing you must feed this tank pretty decently. Keeping those corals well fed. Zoanthids are growing, looking happy. Super great format to start with. I've used that exact same tank in the past and definitely one of my favorites. Just makes everything super convenient, a lot easier, gives you everything basically you need to get going right off the hop. Turnkey solutions are really nice. And smaller tanks like that can be so tough to keep stable, and you're doing a phenomenal job. Okay, next up we've got Nilo Ottaviano. Nilo Ottaviano? Otaviano? I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Nilo? I'm going to say Nilo. If I'm wrong, I'm so sorry. Nilo, let's take a look. Nice. Wow, that's a really cool, that orange-red, what is that, donut coral? Man, that is really cool. That's a really cool color. Nice SPS garden up there. Got a collection of digis, purple, green, and orange. You did the exact same thing with the caps where you've got purple, green, and orange kind of together. Very cool way to display those corals because they don't really compete with each other. But when they grow into each other, when you have like a big colony of like orange fingers next to the identical coral but in green, and then another one in purple, and same thing with the caps, them foliating around each other where they're plating and it's different colored plates. It's so satisfying to look at. It's a really cool way to do it. Totally appreciate that. Euphilia Garden's looking great. I do see that the green cap on the bottom looks like it might have been hit by something at some point. And you got a little bit of cyano perhaps growing over the dead skeleton where it was damaged. Not sure what I make of that yet. I do see you got a little bit of algae here and there. So it might just be a nutrient imbalance. But I'm going to keep watching, see if I can pick up on anything else here. Acros are looking pretty good. Some decent color in them. A couple of them are a little on the pale side, nothing crazy. Might just be the light in that area of the tank is really high compared to the other sides. If you haven't ever considered a par meter, if you don't own one, renting one is a great option just to map out your tank for yourself, know exactly where your hot spots are, where light is the highest, where it's the lowest, and it makes mapping out the placement of corals, especially in like a mixed reef like this, a lot easier. You'll know exactly where is appropriate for what. You have a really nice group of gonoporas down there at the bottom, really nice red. You've got a really, really cool looking green and blue acro on the right side of the tank there too. That's looking a decent size. Oh, it's actually two smaller colonies side by side. That is cool. I don't know if they're the exact same coral and you did that on purpose because you want it to grow out nicely on that side or take up more space there, but really cool. They look really, really nice. That's a lot of color in those two little corals. And yes, I did notice that gorgeous little crochet clam you've got sitting up there on the rockwork with them. That's the right place, in my opinion, for crochet clams. You've also got like a nice maxima, looks like a teardrop perhaps, down on the bottom on the sand bed. Maxima is definitely more flexible with that, but crochet clams, in my experience, for anybody else who wants to try them, have always done remarkably better when they're on rockwork. It doesn't mean they have to be high up in the tank or up on a rock somewhere in the tank. You can even put a rock on the bottom if you want to keep them on the bottom and let them attach to that rock. I just find that crochet in general much prefer being anchored to rock than they do to be in the substrate and then anchoring on the glass below them, or even in the substrate on a small like cradle. If you can get them up on the rockwork in between your SPS corals and stuff, they seem to do a lot better. Nice group of fish too. The anthias are looking really, really swell. Tangs are looking happy, Tang gang. Royal Gramma is another one that I'm a big fan of as far as nano fish go. Royal Grammas are great. Some people don't realize this, but Royal Grammas can get pretty big. Like they're a chunky fish when they get bigger. They don't get super long or anything, but they turn into like these like thick, they're like torpedo cigar-shaped fish hanging out under rocks, and they've got such a mean mug. Like you won't even notice a full-grown big Royal Gramma, and then all of a sudden you notice it hanging out under a rock, mean mugging you. It's the funniest thing ever. And the bigger they get, the more obvious their mean face is. They're not too bad as far as fish go. They're not as bad as dotty backs in my experience in terms of aggression with other fish, but a couple of chromis. If they're paired up, that's pretty awesome. I've always found personally that chromis do much better in large groups than they do in smaller groups, just because their pecking order is pretty hard on whoever's lowest on the totem pole. So you need to get a few fish that are low on the totem pole for them not to be, really soloed on. It's almost like, and others have echoed this in the past, and I'd love to find out from more people who are keeping chromis how they see their hierarchies working, but I've always seen basically you've got the few dominant fish, everybody in the middle, and then the guy at the bottom. And what ends up happening is that guy in the bottom is the one that gets picked on by almost everybody. And then eventually they get skinny because they're not eating enough, and then they perish. And then somebody else ends up lowest on the totem pole, and they do the same thing to that one until your numbers are down to like 1 or 2 fish. Whereas as soon as you have like more than 8, 12, somewhere in that number, it's spread out a little bit more evenly. They don't seem to do that as much. But if those two are paired up and they're happy with each other and they're doing their thing, you've got your male and your female, and they're happy with that, that's awesome. Rocking the reefer sump. Looking pretty clean. You've got, looks like you got the Eco Chic, Tunes Eco Chic LED refugium light underwater with the Kato. Good way to make sure that Kato's getting all of the light possible. Got a chiller there too. I'm assuming wherever you live, it gets kind of hot. I'm glad to see all your cables kind of tucked up under the stand so that they're out of the way and they're not hanging down and potentially dipping into the water or getting dripped on or anything like that. Really, really good move. Circulation in this tank looks really great too. You've got an MP10 it looks like, and then, ooh, is that an ice cap gyre? Or is that a max spec? I can't tell, there's so much coraline on it. But given that there's so much coraline on it, give that thing a citric acid bath. Maybe clean it up a little bit, make it tidy on the outside and the inside, and make sure it runs forever, or as close to forever as we can possibly get with this kind of equipment. Rockwork in the tank is really great. It's minimalistic. You've got most of the rockwork kind of at the back, giving you lots of room in the front for your Euphilia garden. You've got your Zoa garden. There's some separation there, which is nice. Lots of corals on the sand bed. You got a few acans. You've got that really nice kind of red-orange donut coral down there. You've got those brains in the center, which are really, really nice as well. Very, very cool way to showcase those corals and give them a space. And then you've got, I can see you're going for like an SPS dominant top section of the tank. So, you know, a pretty solid format for doing a mixed reef where you've got highlight corals up top where the light's going to be higher, medium light corals, and then the lower light corals at the bottom. Really, really smart move. Great placement again on that crochet. And as this grows in, it's going to look amazing. You've given them lots of headroom, so they're going to have lots of space to grow up and grow out. Oh, very, very cool. Nice wrasses in there too. I just noticed you've got a wrasse there. A little fairy wrasse. Just quickly circling back to the cap that has that little bit of die-off that got some cyanobacteria on it. I'm going to guess, based on how everything else in the tank is looking, that die-off was probably done via a coral bumping into it at some point that shouldn't have been bumping into it, and maybe just burning it. It's also possible that maybe you had some Monty eating nudies or something. Either way, definitely want to make sure that that recession is stopped. And if it has stopped, then this is just a little bit of cyanobacteria growing on top of it. I'm assuming it's cyano. Then again, just have a look at your nutrients and where they're at. Usually you end up with cyano being the dominant algae in the tank if you have basically no nitrates and some amount of phosphate or high phosphates, just because cyano is pretty good at using atmospheric nitrogen versus other algae that need the nitrogen to actually be in the water. I also see that there's a little bit of what looks like maybe diatoms on the rockwork. So I would just take a peek at your nutrients, where they're at, if they're super elevated, and you want to keep them elevated. Some people don't want to bottom out their nutrients. I mean, bottoming out your nutrients is hard because then you got to add tons and tons and tons and tons back. But if you're flying right where you should be, and this is just popping up on its own for some reason, you know, you could definitely look into using something like Dr. Tim's Waste Away or Waste Away Gel to help outcompete that, or you could use KZ CyanoClean is another really great option. But either way, it's the only spot that I really noticed, specifically that red cyano looking stuff, maybe a little bit up on that whiter rockwork. But if that rock is a newer addition, then that would explain to me, because it is pretty white, if it's a newer piece of rock, it would explain to me why you're getting that little bit of what looks like diatom algae up there. It still needs to get its biofilm and start, you know, getting coraline buildup and stuff on it. So it's not entirely surprising. But yeah, that cap, that little bit of cyano on the cap is a little perplexing. Either way, whatever got that cap and made that cyano, hopefully you get the upper hand real quick and you can get those gigantic caps to just grow out and mix up colors all around each other. It's going to look really nice. I've seen many top-down photos of caps grown beside each other like that, and it looks phenomenal. Nilo! Really nice tank. Really, really excited to see how those digis and caps grow together over time and how all of your SPS develop in that tank. I think you got a pretty good collection so far. Things are looking like they're going well. So keep it up, and that tank's going to be stellar in no time. I mean, it's already pretty awesome, but you know what I mean. All grown out. Next up, we've got Reef Freak with a PH. Nice. Oh, first thing I'm noticing, there's some really cool peppermint angel artwork with a couple of, looks like dragon pipefish. Really cool. Now I'm going to look down here at some really nice Tyree leathers, or at least Tyree style leather corals with those green palms looking really beautiful. I see you're fragging them up already. Man, when they get going and they're doing well, they just really, really grow well. They're very easy to farm, and they're such a beautiful coral. Everybody wants one. I want one. Lots of nice SPS growth in here. Big, beautiful bird's nest. Got some smaller frags that look like they're already very well encrusted and starting to grow out. Euphyllias. Little leopard wrasse trying to steal the show. Tamini tang. Beautiful. Really like those orange recordias too. Really nice. Hydenophora up in the back corner there. Kind of like the middleman between LPS and SPS. I've never known quite how to like classify them. I'm sure they're an LPS, but am I? Firefish is looking awesome. Acan's looking sweet. A lot of particulates in the water, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Oh, big, beautiful purple cap. I'm going to be honest, like perfectly clear water is not what you see when you're on a reef. Little things and particulates and a slight cloudiness to seawater is perfectly normal because of the amount of life that is literally floating in the water column. So that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. If you feed a lot, if you have a lot of beneficial bacteria in the tank, you're gonna have slightly cloudy water. Not a big deal. Also, you've got a very, very little bit of that green algae or film algae on the glass, but I don't really see algae anywhere else. Very nice, very well maintained tank, I would have to assume. That's a really nice, you've got an SPS kind of in the middle of the rockwork on the right hand side of the scape, and it's purple and green, like kind of green base transitioning to purple tips. Really, really nice. You're already getting to that fun stage where corals are growing. Certain corals are growing well and big enough, fast enough that you're going to want to keep them trimmed back so that they don't take over the tank all on their own while everything else is growing out. And I think it was a really smart move to put that Hydenophora by itself on a rock, banished to the back corner of the tank, where it's the least likely to burn the things beside it. The back of the glass or the back of the tank and the overflow panel are so well kept. There's nothing. It's just been, scraped down, kept clean. Really, really nice. Don't get me wrong. I come from a time in reefing, like when I started, where having a back panel of glass covered in coraline, just a wall of purple texture, was like the thing, the badge of honor. Everybody wanted as much coraline as possible, so you never scraped it off. That was the way you kind of like flexed a little. You're like, yeah, I can reef. Yeah, my corals are good. Look at that coraline. It's so, I see a clean panel on the back there, and I'm like, you don't have any coraline growth? And it's not true, because it's all of the rocks, and you scraped it off the black glass. Really nice choice for the scape on this rockwork too. You got a lot of coral and stuff on the sand bed, and some smaller rocks placed a little bit more forward. So at first glance, I didn't really notice it, but you do have a lot of caves and kind of texture and structure that provides an airiness to the rockwork, which is great because it's going to aid with the flow. You're not going to have a lot of debris trapped in places you don't want it. And ultimately keeping it a little bit lower down, seeing that this is definitely, you're in the mixed reef category, but you're SPS dominant on the top portion of the rockwork. Having all that space above the SPS is great because they have all that room to grow. They're not going to, necessarily hit the top of the water and just like start, having those weird mushroom growth tips from, wanting to poke out and not being able to. Lots and lots of space up above for them, so that's great. Awesome. Really good work. Really digging the tank. See, a lot of you have the that magnifier on the tank, the flipper magnifier, making me think maybe I should grab one. Are they really that great? Are they awesome? Do they really help like magnify the corals in the tank? Next, we've got Steve Bliss. Let's see what you got, Steve. Oh, sweet. I like the stand. DVD collection right there, or Blu-ray collection right under the stand. Beautiful yellow tang. Looks like maybe a 75 gallon. Is that what I'm looking at? Or is it a 40 breeder? I'm not entirely sure. I think it's a 75. Beautiful anemone in there. Euphyllia garden looking beautiful. Got some coraline on the glass, it looks like. A little bit of algae buildup on the rockwork, it looks like perhaps. Substrate is super, super shallow. So I don't really see any buildup between the substrate and the glass or anything like that. Probably not holding a ton of nutrients in the substrate. Oh yeah, Starry Blenny, one of my favorites. One of the creepiest urchins on the planet, the spiny urchin that has the orange eyeball in the center, which, as far as I'm aware, that orange eyeball can't actually see. It is more of like a light sensor that detects whether or not there is a shadow or something passing over it. And if you do pass a shadow over that urchin, they typically take all their spines and point them straight up. Super threatening. And working in tanks with those guys can be a little bit risky. I have been spiked when I wasn't paying attention more than once, and man, does that smart. Clown hanging out on the bottom. Oh! Oh! I see some clownfish eggs perhaps developing. That's super cute. The cutest thing about clownfish eggs is because they're perfectly clear and you can see through them. You can see the little silver eyes developing, like looking straight up. Oh, that's a lot of fun. I don't know if you have plans to try to rear them or not. There's a really, really good chance that if you don't, take them out and purposefully give them a place to raise them, probably not going to survive, but they just become food for the reef. So it's not like a total loss, but just in case you do want to try to get some clownfish babies out of your pair there, then you definitely want to set up a little clownfish rearing station, essentially. I'd love to give you more info on that. I've never done it, so I can't. I don't want to steer you wrong. Got some AI lights up there. This looks like a pretty easy-going, low-maintenance tank. You have a lot of soft corals and, a few LPS, and none of them look like they're particularly difficult corals or fussy corals. Just makes keeping the tank pretty easy. I mean, look under the stand. There is, tons of space, and then, oh, we're swinging around to the other side. Sweet. Using a standard aquarium as a sump. Great way to add water volume and save some money. Not going for a full-blown acrylic setup. Don't get me wrong, acrylic sumps are super beautiful, and I'm a big fan of them. I like using them. But it's nice to just like show the world you don't need, a super expensive acrylic sump to be successful. You can just use some, $1 a gallon sale glass aquariums and get the job done. A few bulkheads and some drilling, which isn't too hard to do, and you're off to the races. Same thing, you don't need like high-end white holding containers for your saltwater or RO water. You can use brute containers. They're usually quite a bit less expensive, and that's what I use, honestly. I have these brute containers, the exact same ones. That way you can, drop all the coin on the things that matter most, like more coral, good lighting, good flow. It's also nice to be able to put everything behind a wall instead of having it under the tank. It is so much easier to work on sumps and stuff when they're, you're not bending down on your hands and knees to get to them or having to tuck yourself under a stand and open a pair of doors to access it. Being able to walk into a room and just like casually reach in, grab filter floss, throw it in the garbage and put a new piece in, or have like a specific sink right where all of your equipment is, where you can take your equipment, rinse it off, clean it up, take a brush to it and throw it back. So much easier. Rock work in the tank is decent. You didn't go super high on the back glass or anything, so lots of room if you wanted to get some taller corals, like easy corals, like just to stick with the theme of what you got going on in there already. If you aspire to SBS, be my guest. But if you want to stick with like the easier softies and stuff that you've got in there already, colt corals, Kenya tree corals. One of my favorites is the Palau Nephthia, a green Nephthia, which is very similar to your Kenya tree or your colt coral. They all grow like tall, wispy, and they're very forgiving corals, and they all have a slightly different texture and color. So colt corals are kind of like a fuzzier, fingery looking coral in my experience. The Kenya trees, they kind of have a slightly more kind of outstretched appearance, and their polyps are spread out further than they are on like a colt coral or a Nephthia. So they have a grainier kind of texture to them, and the polyps are a little bit more interesting. And they're more on the pink side versus like the Colt, which I find are typically pretty brown. And then you can even get Kenya trees in like a pale greenish color. They're not neon green like the Palau Nephthya is, but they are a version of green. And then that Palau Nephthya is like by far my favorite, probably soft coral that I can think of. They are just screaming green, you know, fuzzy, outstretched, beautiful looking coral, very, very tree-like, just super, super pretty. And that'll kind of like fill up that back portion of the glass, and it'll probably also help suck up some of the extra nutrients that the algae in the tank may be using. It's hard to tell how much of that is algae, how much is coraline, just based on that it's a very blue light setup you got going on, or at least program that you're running on those AIs. So it's hard to judge, but if it is a little bit extra algae you want to cut back on, those specific corals and like leathers of any kind really will suck up nutrients and make them go away. Steve, thank you so much for sending in your video today. Thanks to everybody who submitted a video. I absolutely love seeing what everybody in the reef community gets up to. It's really, really cool to see all the different ways that you can reef, because there's no one perfect way to keep a reef tank. And there's so many different flavors and styles and personalities that come through in these tank builds. It's a lot of fun. If you would like to submit your tank for me to take a look at so we can all, you know, feast our eyes upon your masterpiece, you can go ahead and submit that by hashtagging the video you upload to YouTube with BRStv Reacts. That's all it is. And then we find it. Very, very easy. And if you'd like to, you can check out some of the reacts we have previously done, which there are some doozies. There's amazing tanks in this. They're right here. Go have a look. Lots of really nice tanks. Super, super cool.